One of them is politically incorrect, because one shouldn't talk about this aspect of things, but I am personally fascinated to know what effect it's had on JoAnn's career to be the first woman conductor in charge of a major American symphony orchestra. I mean, how much your career has been influenced, forwarded, held back, or whatever, for sexist reasons. And or Jerry, would you like to address either of those two questions?
I certainly can't address the first one, so it should go to JoAnn.
Should we get that one over with? You know, people always seem a little sheepish about asking this question, but it's still, I think it's still valid to talk about, and I certainly don't mind talking about it. I feel very lucky to have had the chance to conduct that I have had, because I think had I tried to enter the field even 10 years earlier, it wouldn't have been possible. It's hard to comment about how much, how that has been an impediment or a difficulty or challenge, but we do recognize that our world, our music world, is very conservative, and it's built on a tradition of centuries-old tradition. So some of that conservatism carries over into how we view the people involved in it. But as orchestras start to change, we see women entering the orchestra world. Of course, orchestras are now probably half women. Women soloists, women composers. I think it was inevitable that we would start to see women on the podium. And I wouldn't say exactly that the role of conductors changed, but perhaps the style of conducting, the style of dealing with musicians, of collaborating with them has changed. That too made it perhaps more possible for a woman to be thought of in this way. So I can't really say, and as Jerry said, he can't comment on it. I really can't comment on it from the other perspective. You know, only being a woman in this profession, I know that there must have been situations, and there will still be situations in which people will feel hesitant about a woman on the podium for whatever reasons. But there might have been situations where people were intrigued by it or interested. In our country, it seems to have become more normal now, less surprising. I still find that in Europe, people are surprised by it, intrigued by it, and perhaps a little skeptical too. But it has changed, and for myself, I've probably tried not to look for opportunities for finding prejudice, because we know that it exists for all of us in many different ways. But I felt it would get in the way of my being able to make music, so I haven't looked for it. So as strange as it seems, I don't think I'm the best person to answer that question. I don't know, but I certainly feel that the opportunities I've had have been ones that I've been treated with great welcome and great.
You don't mind, but I also ask an occasional question. So what about when you started out? When you started out, there were, except for I guess Sarah Caldwell, were there any other female conductors?
Well, Antonia Rico maybe. There really weren't many models.
No.
Right.
So what did you think? So what was you were a pianist, right?
No, I was actually first a classical guitarist.
Guitarist. So you wanted to become a conductor. How did that happen? And what thoughts went through your mind that said there are no women playing
I didn't know that. I think that's the best. I started studying music when I was 7, and since my parents were not performing musicians, they did not realize it. I think I really only began to be aware of this when I was in my middle teenage years, that women were not really visible on the podium. And by then it was too late. And I think I just persisted thinking that this is something that I truly was passionate about and wanted to do. But there were no models. I mean, Antonia Rico, some of you may know that name. She became known because she was the teacher of Judy Collins, the pop singer, the folk singer, and Sarah Caldwell. But there were really there was no one else at that point.
Let me ask one more. So, as everybody knows, some orchestras as recently as a few years ago had only male members. The Vienna Philharmonic had only male members of the orchestra. In fact, when there was a protest at Carnegie Hall, there was one woman in the orchestra who was an extra player for like 25 years, a harpist, but they would never allow her to join the orchestra. So, because of this protest at Carnegie Hall, they made her a member of the orchestra. And then, of course, 1 or 2 years later, she retired. And in fact, in Berlin, probably it's been about 10 years since they've allowed women in the orchestra. In this country, the first major orchestra to have a woman was the New York Philharmonic, and it was back in the early 60s with Orrin O'Brien, a wonderful bass player, and now there's, I don't know, whether it's half, 40%, most of the positions now, interestingly enough, are being won by women. Now, so we don't correctly allow all male orchestras. It's absurd. But I always have this question, and this is really Poppy's even more politically incorrect part than yours, which is, in San Francisco they had an all-female orchestra. So, does it still exist, and what do you think about that?
Well, Jerry, I have to take some responsibility for this. I was conductor of the Women's Philharmonic for 10 years, but I did not found it, but I was the conductor of it, and it was an orchestra of all women. We played music by women, and while men were technically allowed to audition, men never did. But it was curious. When I asked, we periodically would ask the women in the orchestra how they felt about that. Should we make it a co-ed orchestra? They always said no. And they said that they felt that the atmosphere was different with women, and all women, and it was different. And
well, that's what men said too when they were the orchestra. The big argument in Vienna was, oh, they get pregnant and leave, and then they're not committed anymore. Absurd, as they say.
Or that the work is too hard for them, or this. But they felt that it was a special orchestra, and that people were very supportive of each other, and they were supportive of the idea of playing music by women. There was a certain challenge I always felt in it, just generally with a group of women. We always wanted to do things by consensus. So there was a lot more discussion about everything than there ever is in any other orchestra that I've ever worked with. It was charming, on its own terms. It was very charming, and we made a case for music by women. That was our main thing, to perform music by women composers and to record it and to eventually, of course, interest other orchestras in playing it.
And you never had any protests. Nobody was marching out in front saying, "How come you don't?" No, just curious.
Having an all-female orchestra would certainly avert the problem that was expressed to me over dinner some years ago in Philadelphia by a very successful and well-known conductor of our time, Neville Mariner, who said he really didn't think there should be women in orchestras because they distract the men.
That's like the Orthodox Jews who are not allowed to look at women, right, during when they're praying, they have to have them in the balcony, or they can't watch them sing because they'll be distracted. He should have more faith in the male members of